Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to give a quick introduction for the panel, and then we will get started. So first of all, thank you so much for attending our SOMA event for writing competitive fellowship applications. We are delighted to have 3 speakers here today to tell us their tips and tricks for writing these applications. So first we have Dr. Charles DeCarli, who is a professor in neurology. He is the director of the Alzheimer's Disease Center and the IDEA Lab, the principal investigator of the Cognitive Aging T32, and was one of the first people across the country to investigate age-related diseases and cognition across races. Today, he serves as the leader of a federally funded resource center for minority aging research, and as a testament to his dedication, Dr. DeCarli was actually the one who approached us to help get this event going. Riza, do you want to go ahead and introduce the next speakers?
Great. So also we have Dr. Whitmer. She's an assistant adjunct professor of neurology at the Alzheimer's Disease Center in Sacramento, where she is a research education component leader. Dr. Meyer studied the cognitive and mental health disparities in regional and ethnic minorities and older adults from a broad population level and also at the individual level using an interdisciplinary approach. Jose, can you?
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Rachel Whitmer. She is a professor of public health sciences. She has Alzheimer's Disease Center Research Associate Director, and she researches population science and epidemiology to inform cognitive and brain aging in diverse populations that historically have been excluded from research.
So thank you all again for coming. We will begin by asking each of the speakers for a brief introduction to speak about their experiences with fellowship and grant applications prior to opening up the floor to questions. If you do have any questions, please don't be shy. You can put them in the chat box and I will moderate the questions and ask them myself. If you would like to ask the question yourself, please simply type the word question and then I'll call on you when appropriate, and then you can ask the question for yourself. So with that, I am going to pass off the floor to Dr. DeCarli, and he will kick us off for today.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's a real pleasure to be here, you all. I will just start off by saying this is a passion of mine, and that is that I've had the opportunity to train quite a few people, some of whom have actually gone on to senior positions and leadership positions. And I feel it's a blessing to me to be able to share my enthusiasm with what I'm doing with you all and to recognize that you are our future. And that is really important because the NIH went through a period of near starvation a while back, and we now have a gap, and we want people like you all to come in and help us out so that us old farts can retire, because otherwise I can't take any more time off and I'll get in trouble. So I need your help. Let me just give you a little bit of background about what my experience has been. I have had numerous, been the senior advisor for 3 graduate students, but nearly a dozen postdocs. But more importantly, I was the member of the NIA Neuroscience Review Committee for 6 years and then ended up chairing that committee. And that committee was responsible for T32s, T31, not T31s, F31s, F32s, as well as K awards. And I've had about half dozen to 10 K awards as well. So I feel like my experience is fairly strong at the level of applications in the postdoc and beyond. And so and of course, I am the director of the Cognitive Neuroscience of Aging T32. So I have some experience with that. We just had, so far we've had 7. We had our first 3 in a class, went through and each of them got jobs, and we have 4 more that just started this year. So I have a little experience in the T32 area as a director as well. So I'm here to help you in any way, and I can talk about how these applications, particularly fellowship applications, what I like to see, but also, beyond fellowship and how to think about the pipeline of career development for you all. Okay, and now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rachel Whitmer, who is the Associate Director of the ADRC, but a epidemiologist, outstanding on her own, and leader of a number of very important research programs.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And thank you, Charlie, for that introduction. So I'm professor in the Department of Public Health Sciences and chief of the Division of Epidemiology and associate director of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. I was recruited to UC Davis by about 2.5 years ago, actually by Dr. Charles DeCarli, to really bring public health and population health and bridge that with the Alzheimer's Center. So I think a lot of you are neuroscience PhD students. My undergraduate degree was actually in neuroscience. And so I do a lot of work on Alzheimer's disease, dementia, brain imaging in large population-based studies that really focus on ethnic and racial minority groups, as well as people with lower levels of education, to try to understand why we have different rates of dementia and how things that happen over your life course can affect your brain health late in life. In terms of training, I'm part of the T32 that Dr. DeCarli is the PI of. I am also part of a T32 at UCSF because at my former institution, I was part of that T32, which is in translational epidemiology. So I've mentored a number of PhD students who have gotten F awards during their PhD program. And I've also mentored a number of postdocs who have gotten both K01s and the newer mechanism, the K99R00 series. And actually all of my postdocs have gotten one of those and moved on to junior faculty positions. So I'm pleased to be here today and answer questions as best I can. And I'm going to turn the floor over now to Dr. Wayne Meyer.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Wayne Meyer. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Neurology with Charlie and Rachel. And I'm really happy to be here to talk with my mentors, really, on, just my own experience with training grants. But I am actually trained as a social psychologist. So my PhD is in social psychology, and I study the social contextual factors related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. I have big interest in studying disparities that affect underserved populations as it relates to AD and dementia and mental health. I'm also very much interested in caregiver interventions in collaboration with communities to be able to reduce stress and burden in underserved groups. Most recently, my research has been conducted with the Vietnamese community in Northern California, and doing a lot of education and outreach and intervention work to be able to address stress in this underserved population. And so that's a little bit about my research. I also lead the research education component at our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and have been really fortunate to have great mentors like Charlie and Rachel I actually, my perspective will be, because I'm more junior than they are, as someone who's recently been on a lot of training grants. I was in a T32 at UCSF before I came to UC Davis. And because my research was really around health disparities and Asian American mental health before I came, I needed a lot more training in Alzheimer's disease. And so applied for what's called a diversity supplement to the Alzheimer's Disease Center, which I can talk more about later if people have questions. But you can apply for that at any stage in your career, at high school, undergraduate, graduate, postdoc, assistant professor, and it's really meant to increase the diversity of the workforce around Alzheimer's disease and health-related research. So I applied for this diversity supplement to get more training in Alzheimer's disease, and then did a 1.5-year postdoc with the ADC, and then came on as faculty after I got my K awards. So I can talk a lot about just the myriad of training grants that I've been on, but that have really all helped me to have a good understanding of training grants and what they're looking for. And I'm happy to talk to people individually and share my application. It's funny because actually Asian Americans are not listed as a population that's underrepresented in health-related research by the NIH definition, but I just had to, make the case that Southeast Asians are a different population from other Asians, and that you can also come from like a rural area or a disadvantaged background to be able to make the case for the diversity supplement that I got. So I'm happy to talk about all of that today.
So we'll turn it back to you, Lindsay.
Great. So thank you so much for those brief introductions and sharing of your experience. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat box and we would be happy to moderate them. The first question I'd like to ask, which is a little bit of a big or hefty question, is for those people from underrepresented backgrounds that may not have had the luxury to get as much lab experience, say, how might they go about applying for these grants? What would increase their chances, therefore, of getting them? And is that something that can be addressed in the personal statement, and how might you do that?
So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, Lindsay, in the sense that, so maybe can I take a step back and make a suggestion? And that is, what I believe, and I'd like to hear Rachel get her and Wayne get their comments, but what I believe is the most successful people are successful in two ways. One, they identify an area that they're very interested in and want to develop a career in. And that area can be just about anything. So, let's be clear. You can get fellowships at every level. Science has every color, creed you can imagine. So don't think that you just have to apply for, say, a cellular, molecular, or something like that. So it's important to identify what are your strengths, where do you want to develop your career? And then I think the most important thing is connecting with a mentor that will help you accomplish those. It really is, I'm not gonna lie to you. You could say it was an old men's network, old woman's network, old white person's network, whatever. But what it really is a network. It's networking. And to get a mentor that you can work with, it just by far and away positions you to be more successful. Anything else takes second to it. Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely think having a good mentor and a mentoring team is absolutely critical. I will say that among my trainees, there is range, there is heterogeneity in the amount of experience, and some of it does have to do with, I have had postdoctoral fellows who had to work full time while they were doing their PhD. And so they were not as well published as some other postdoctoral fellows I had who during their PhD, they were on a T32 and they had a GSR. And so they had more publications and more co-authored publications. But the way we handled that is that we were upfront and talked about it in both of their applications. So a good mentor is going to talk about your situation and contextualize it, because it's really important to understand how you did in the situation that you were in and the resources that you had. So a good mentor is going to talk about that. And I think it's okay to be upfront and say, I didn't have the luxury as others did. I couldn't volunteer as much in a lab. I was working or I had X going on, but I'm really committed and I'm really passionate about this particular topic. And the mentor can also speak to what you've done so far. And, you know, I really think having a good mentor, I also think tenacity and perseverance is really critical as well. And ego resilience, because during your PhD, your ego gets very much beat up. At least mine did, and others do as well. So I think, you know, ego resilience and tenacity is really key. But, you know, speaking about your particular circumstances and your particular situation is very important when you're applying for a fellowship, because the grant review committee is going to look at you, hopefully, as a person. You know, who was this person? Where do they come from? What did they do? What was their situation? So it's very, very critical to include all that. And a good mentor is going to be good at guiding you in how to talk about that. But Dr. Meyer, did you want to answer?
You like took the words right out of my mouth, Rachel. I was going to say very much the same thing. Can you guys hear me okay? I feel like I'm frozen.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So for me in undergrad, I had to work all 4 years, and I double majored, and I tried to volunteer as much as I could. I was also in a sorority. So I was really, really busy. And as a consequence, my GPA really suffered, and I couldn't volunteer in research labs as much as I wanted to. So for me, it took a lot of tenacity to get into the graduate program that I wanted to get in. I really wanted to get into UC Davis and work with this particular faculty member, and I didn't get in the first time. And so I met with him, and he said, this is what you need to do. You know, get more research experience, volunteer, do this, do that, really work on your personal statement, take your GREs again. And I did all of those things. And so it really was just, you know, it took a little bit longer than someone who maybe didn't have to work during undergrad or didn't have to graduate in 4 years. Maybe they didn't have to double major, but, you know, I think in the end, it worked out. But just what Rachel said, I had a really good person who told me exactly what I needed to do, and I did it. And so it does take some tenacity, and it might take a little bit more time, but you can make it happen.
All right, thank you, everyone.
So Lindsay, can I ask you a question? Oh, good, go. Rose, are you taking over here?
Oh, if you had anything to follow up that discussion, feel free.
Yeah, so it would be very helpful for us to understand. I had assumed we're speaking to graduate students. Are there undergraduates in this meeting as well?
If you'd like, you can all respond in the chat box. I believe the majority of people here are graduate students.
Okay. Yeah.
And a handful of postdocs too, I believe.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. So I guess kind of following that line of thought with mentorship, how does one really identify their own mentorship needs, kind of assessing what they have, what they don't have, and how do they identify those mentors, and more importantly, how do they reach out to those mentors to really form that mentorship network that's so important?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So let me speak to the graduate student coming from a graduate student role looking for a fellowship, okay? The best thing you can do is to look to your current major advisor and ask that person where they think would be best for you to go next, because they know you the best, okay? That said, sometimes people finish their PhDs and they want to go in a slightly different direction. And if that's the case, the sooner you reach out to prospective people, and a lot of times that's simply, I've reviewed the literature, your name keeps popping up, I really like what you're doing, here's what I'm doing, and you send a letter of invitation. I get one like that probably every couple of 3 weeks. And sometimes that works out beautifully. And in fact, that's often the way it works. So most of the postdoctoral programs are built on having a relationship with someone in the program, whether it's, if you're getting a postdoc, even if they don't have a T32, but imagine you have a T32. Most of the time, so for example, my T32, you have to have identified a mentor before the application process. So I would say that once you get to the place where you know what your thesis is and you're thinking about where to go next, start to have those discussions and start to reach out to people in your area of interest and probe about availabilities that they may have and to set up. As Wayne said, the idea of picking a mentor, identifying that person, and letting them work with you to do the application process is always the best, because fellowships, by and large, are one-on-one relationships with a junior faculty member. And that junior faculty member tends to they have programs they're doing, they need help to get them accomplished. They want the fellow involved tightly. The fellows are given the opportunity to write papers, often, to be honest with you, do some of the seminal research. But again, this is the other thing. My concept of a fellowship is it should be at least 3 years, and it should be designed to lead you to where you want to go. All right? Whether that's in industry, whether that's in teaching, whether that's in academics. And it should give you tools. So you should come out with some research tools, grant writing ability if you want to be in academia, or some experience with industry if you want to go in that direction.
Sure, I'm happy to also add in a bit as well about identifying a good mentoring team. So, I think Dr. DeCarli was speaking about when you're at the doctorate level in grad school and thinking about that step for postdocs. So just to back up what he said is it's absolutely about those connections, someone who's doing work in the area that you would like to do. But, also it's important to ask around, and it's important to talk to current mentees and past mentees, because someone on paper might be the perfect match for you with the research, but maybe their work style isn't going to align with yours. Or maybe they're a really big name, but they're not the best mentor. I mean, that can happen. You can be a really big name, but not good at perhaps empowering others. So I think really getting a lot of good intel, collect your data and talk to people. And that's really true, in terms of looking for a postdoctoral fellowship, but also looking for, graduate school as well. I think it's a little harder if you're making the leap from, undergraduate to graduate school. You might not know exactly what you want to do, but you still know your general interest. And, talking to those current lab members and the current and past mentees is really, really key. And, right now we have the challenge of COVID, so everything is virtual. But in the pre-COVID world and in the post-COVID world, going to these conferences and really not just going to see presentations and talks, but going to the posters, getting to know others who are around the same stage or maybe a bit ahead of you, and asking them. I saw that you did your postdoctoral fellowship with Dr. Whitmer. what is she really like? You know, it's okay to have those conversations. I always tell all of my mentees at every stage to collect your data and talk to people. And so I think that's really critical in finding a good mentor and a good match. And the other thing I wanted to say is it's really important to be flexible and nimble and kind of open-minded, because you might think that a certain specific area is your passion, and you might choose to work with someone for your PhD for that area, and you may end up changing your mind. You know, you may say, oh, I'm not sure that I want to do this area anymore. You may switch advisors. I switched my PhD advisor, but it was the best thing because I ended up in a field that I'm more passionate about. So I think it's important to have some of that flexibility, and that also can help you build up that tenacity as well. So, but Dr. Meyer, do you want to add in?
I don't think I have anything to add. I think you both covered it well.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask the next question, if that's okay.
Sure.
We would like to know, in your opinion, what is the most important part of the application process, or the most important part of the application? And basically, what do review committees or review panels kind of weight the most?
So that's a really good question. For
Sorry, I just wanted
postdocs,
to
right?
yeah, for postdoc applications, or you're already in a postdoc and applying for a K-99, or a PhD student applying for an F? Because
Okay, I kind of thought it would be a similar answer for all three of them, so that's my fault. But maybe for each
Okay.
of them, like the most
Okay,
common
so
one.
we you want to go, Rachel? Do you
Like
want
a
to, and Wayne, we'll
T32,
go
an
up
F31,
to
a
less
K99.
F31, F32 that way. Okay, so the best thing you can do in an F grant is to have, so there are common things that all of these ask about. And these 4 common things are: 1, who you are as a candidate. So where did you go to undergraduate training? What did you do? 2, how have you done so far? Now, some of that is really related to if you're going to write an F31 or an F32, that depends on where you are in your training, right? So if you're 3rd year of your graduate work, the F32 will be expected to be much more mature than when you try to write an F32 right at the beginning. So those are the kind of things that you need to sort of get a feel for. Then the second thing is your mentor, okay? So those 2 things, you and your mentor are really 50% of that. Then there's the project. And I will tell you, they say the project should only be ranked 25% of it, but the tighter and the more straightforward you can make the project, the better it will be. So that to me is the thing that I tend to often counsel graduate students about, and that is, you know, you can't write something like, I want to cure cancer, okay? It's got to be something you can get done in a period that can be accomplished, and you have timelines, and you have goals at each year to be sure that you have the ability, and make sure it's not too ambitious. That's the key, because really you're doing 2 things with these. These are all parts of what we call training grant. They sort of smudge into career development awards, but they're all about training mostly. And then, so you've got to emphasize how your training will be accomplished, and why you need this training to accomplish this project. And then the number 4 is your environment. But you know, UC Davis, yeah, I'm assuming everyone here is at UC Davis. You guys have the fortune of being at UC Davis, and it's a very strong neuroscience and science academic. So there are some places where it can be challenging because the resources may not be fully available. If that's the case, collaborations are also okay. You can overcome some of the limitations of your particular university if there's something missing. Say, you know, I just worked with someone who wrote a K-99, and you know, one of the things that the neuroimaging component was not, the person wasn't familiar. So we set something up where she would come to my lab and learn, even though that's not the main focus of her training. So it's really writing a strong candidate statement, being a strong candidate, having a strong mentor statement, and then being really kind of strategic about your research and how that adds to your training. This is the most important thing. How does this, why do I need this training to accomplish this research? And why do I want to be in this place?
Yeah, I was going to add to that real quick. I think when I wrote the training piece of these applications, that was always the hardest part for me, because it's easier for me to write a research paper versus like, who do I want to be when I grow up? And then how am I going to get there? You know, like, what are the steps that's going to help me to be who I want to be? So that part is really hard. But, you know, I would say that one of the things that I did that really helped was to get a lot of eyes to look at my application. All of my mentors, I had look at my application, and I had, you know, peers who also looked at my application as well, because I firmly believe that the more people who can read it and give you input, the better it's going to be. So I'm very much keen on just getting a lot of eyes and perspectives in looking at the application to make sure that it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense to somebody who, you know, isn't in your field, then it might not make sense to anyone else. So I really would advocate for that. But yeah, other than that, I agree with everything Charlie said.
Yeah, and I think,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I was just going to add, you know, a big part of it, the sort of more junior you are in your career. So like the F, which is something you apply for as a grad student. And then when you're a postdoc, there's two options, the K99, R00, or the K01 or the K23. You know, they're looking at your mentor as much as they're looking at you. So you could be a really awesome candidate with a great record and a great idea, but if your main mentor does not have a very long or very well established track record in mentoring, it'll impact your score. And so that's always tricky, because of course, you know, I just went through this with two of my postdocs submitting their K99. There were some other people I wanted them to put on as secondary mentors, and those people were junior faculty. And after my postdocs consulted with some other postdocs who had K99s at other places, we finally decided that all of the mentors should be associate or full. I'm not saying that that's a hard and fast rule, but it's very tricky. It's just very, very tricky in the sense that they're looking at you, but they're also looking at your mentor very closely. And does that mentor have the experience, the support, and also the time? Because you could also get someone very established and very seasoned, but maybe they don't have time. And so I've seen all those different comments come back, you know, from the review committee. So I think it's just important to think about your being in an environment that has a bunch of, you know, different options for you. And what's nice about these is that there's like a main mentor or two co-main mentors, but you can also have a mentoring team. And so, you know, it's hard sometimes when you're getting comments from 4 or 5 people on your papers or 4 or 5 people on your grants. But on the other hand, it's really good to not just have one person. So it's really good to have a mentoring team. So I just wanted to add that as well.
I just want to throw in 2 additional things. 1, start early. You're going to need letters of recommendations, and the worst thing that happens is you say, oh, by the way, I need this next Tuesday and it's Friday. Okay, start early, and don't be afraid. And this is the hardest thing I find that graduate students have with writing things about themselves, is to really state your strengths and give us something to work with. Okay, modesty is not what we want today. okay? We want you to tell us how good you are, okay? So we can do it. And some of us may even ask you to write a draft letter, okay? So that's number one. Start early, speak well of yourself, and even consider writing draft letters, at least to help people understand more clearly what you're looking for, so that with their letters of support, they can emphasize that. The second thing is that most people who have successful applications to particularly to K grants have seen a successful application. So the more you know somebody who's written a successful application, this is training stuff. They're not stealing anybody's ideas. They're just some basic things that you all need to know about how to write this thing. And let me tell you, I agree with Wayne on this. I have written now 3 T32 applications, and every time I write one of these things, it is the hardest thing I've ever written. Training grants are hard to write. Okay, so I'm sorry. It's you know, in some ways, scientific manuscripts are formulaic, right? Here, you have to be a little bit more creative, but there still is a formula that works. So the more of you that you can share, and this again is the network, the more you guys can share. Anyone who gets a successful T31, or F31, F32, or gets on a T and shares it with their friends and colleagues, the better you're going to be, okay? And there are people, oh my, I have a black cat too, Lindsay. I sometimes have to chase him out of the room. And I just want to say that there are people in the university who know how to write these grants too. So don't think that you can't turn to others for help, okay? Don't count just on, as Rachel said, don't just count on your primary mentor. Be willing to look outside. The CTSC, for example, has some, there's graduate research programs, or what's it? God, I'm trying to think of it. There's a graduate research administration or something, I don't remember. Graduate training, I don't know.
There is some kind of, yeah, there's some, well, I know the School of Medicine offers some kind of training thing. I don't know if it's open to grad students. It's definitely open to postdocs, sort of about grant writing. But
Yes.
But to back up what, Charlie's saying with my people, we have a collection of Fs and K99s that have been successfully scored. And, my people are hooked up with, I collaborate across many different institutions. I have a huge network of collaborators. And so through that, my postdocs, the K99s that just got submitted, they had these weekly meetings with 6 others, and they were all sharing not only their drafts, but they were also sharing successfully highly funded ones. So they had access to ones that were previously written. And I did not have that. And I will say that I suffered from that when I was working on, I think I had it for my KO1, but not for my R. I suffered from not having access to people who had written highly funded grant applications in my discipline. So it's very important to look. It's a different way of writing. I mean, it's,
Yes.
when you write papers, it is different, and then you write grants, and then with the training grant, and you're writing about yourself and your plans. But even the science portion of the grant is different than the papers, because you have to sound very excited. You have to keep reminding the reviewers why it's so important from a health perspective, and it has to be, there really can't be any hesitation. I mean, you have to sound very confident in the scientific idea that you are proposing. And so that has to come across in the writing, and you have to be passionate about it, and that passion has to come through.
And let me say, so the other thing that I want to say about background and where you're sharing about your passion thing, one thing that people get hung up on, and it's a little frustrating to me, is that just because you're of a diverse background does not mean you have to do diversity research, okay? I think you can do biomolecular genetics, all this stuff. Do not get confused there, okay? There tends to be you know, when we were on the RICMAR, when we had the RICMAR at UC Davis, which is a diversity program, many people in that RICMAR were doing diversity research. But in fact, I think that we need to grow everywhere, across every field. And so the more you can understand where the applications are open to recognizing diverse backgrounds as a way of affirmative, I know this is a bad word, it's no longer politically correct, but affirmative action, okay? Use your diversity as to your advantage, okay? Make that clearly part of your statements, but be sure that that doesn't have to be the only thing you're counting on. Does that make sense? And,
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
What would be the best way to address the weaker parts of an application, such as below average grades, limited research experience, etc.? Because I know that is something that can be held against you, but how do we properly address it?
well, so the first thing I will say is that below average grades is not necessarily at all a problem if you show progress. In other words, someone can finish their undergraduate with not stellar work and then do their first year of graduate school and get straight A's, for example. Okay, to me, that's a sign. You know, everybody, I hate to say it this way, but everybody matures at a different trajectory. And some people are a little bit slower than others. Some people needed, you know, to find their niche and they can take off. So if you've had some issues in the past, but you're doing well now, emphasize that. In terms of the research experience, I think there's where the training becomes, a tight training program becomes mandatory. Identifying, okay, this is what I want to do. These are the 5 steps I need to accomplish to get there, and you outline them specifically. Because if they see that you don't have this experience, then the reviewers are going to ask how they're going to get there. Are they overstating? Are they overreaching? Then it becomes critical that you show how you're going to get there. And so many people fall down on the training part. So I would say that behind the research piece, the training aspect is the number 2, which gets dinged on these applications. So if you feel like you haven't gotten a lot of training and experience, then you need to emphasize how you are going to get that experience and how you're going to apply that experience to accomplish what you need to, and the timeline. Okay, now I will tell you, it will not work for you to say, well, I'm going to do 8 classes a semester for the first 2 years, okay? Because then you're never going to get your research done. So you pick the things you need to do, and they have to be reasonable and targeted to accomplish the goals of your research.
And I was just going to say really quickly, I think you can address, you know, if there were some limitations to that contributed to lower grades or not getting a lot of research experience, but I wouldn't spend like a ton of time on that, like in a statement, because then it starts sounding like excuses, right? So you could say like a 1 or 2 sentence thing, very brief, and then talk about what you're going to do moving forward, like Charlie mentioned. So I think you can address it certainly because people might have questions, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it.
And I would say if you're in graduate school applying for a fellowship, people are not going to be spending too much time looking at the GPA of your undergraduate, okay? They're going to want to know what you did in your graduate school and how successful you were. And in there, you know, publications will be important if you didn't do as well as you would have liked to in your undergraduate. But again, it's going to be focused mostly on your graduate experience.
All right, great. So we have about time for 1 or 2, maybe 2 or 3 more questions. For this next one, let's go ahead and switch up the order. Let's go Dr. Meyer, Dr. Whitmer, and then Dr. DeCarli. So the next question it has to do with letter writers and mentorship, that whole issue again. So from what we've heard from you guys, there's a lot of the application that doesn't only depend on you. It actually depends on your mentorship network. So how does one select the proper letter writers and then give them the information that they need to write the best letters possible?
I'll just speak from my own personal experience. When I thought about who my letter writers would be, I tried to choose people who, were very successful, and then also whom I had interacted with sort of in different parts of my graduate career. So one obviously was my major advisor, who knew me best, and who helped with my research ideas and things like that. The other person that I chose was someone who I taught a class with as a graduate student, and he was the main, the faculty person who taught it, but that person could speak about my teaching abilities. And so I think when you're thinking about who your letter writers are going to be, you want to make it strategic in terms of people who can talk about different aspects of you and how you would be successful, whether that's your writing, your research program, your teaching. Maybe you've worked a lot in the community doing research. You could have a person in the community write a letter for you. So I think for me, I try to attack it from like a rounded set of letters that would be able to speak to who I was like as a whole. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I would just back up everything that Dr. Meyer said, but I think it also depends on which mechanism we're talking about, because for some of them, you don't get to choose the letter writers. The letter writers are automatically your mentors, right? Your primary mentors or your secondary mentors or your advisors. So they have to write a letter for you and talk about how they're going to support you, where are they going to train you, what's their expertise, and what are they bringing to you as the candidate. So, and then with some of these applications, besides the mentoring team, they will ask for additional letters. And that's what Dr. Meyer was saying, was to be strategic in those letters that are in addition to the mentoring team letters. So someone who definitely knows you and has worked with you in some capacity, and they can be, knowing you and working with you in different capacities, because then it's nice, because then they can talk about different things. And that's what Dr. Meyer was saying about being strategic in who you choose. It's also important to give them, either a draft or even just some bullet points or a list of what you think are your top highlights and best things as a candidate. And when you're giving this out, you wouldn't give the same list to these 3 or 4 writers, because you want them to emphasize and focus on different things that are complementary, and you don't want them to be redundant. So
the only thing I would add is that you're better off getting a letter of support from somebody you know well and who knows you well than somebody who's rich and famous, but doesn't know you as well. Okay. It goes so much further for me when I'm reading a letter to somebody who knows this candidate well and can speak to the issues, than somebody who writes sort of a more pro forma letter. If you're if you're a graduate student and you're applying for a postdoc, it is almost, as Rachel said, it is essential that your major advisor be one of those letter writers. Okay, because otherwise, it just raises questions if you don't. But then again, and I'll come back to this, it's not bad, as Rachel alluded to write a draft or outline what you think this person really needs to say. And again, I'm going to say it, most of the times people don't say enough, okay, about themselves. So if you're going to get one message from me, is to talk yourselves up, okay? Be sure that you say, how good you really are, because you are really good.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question to that, if that's okay. I know that a lot of graduate students, a lot of the times, are at some point in their life required to like write a reference letter for themselves. And I know that we've talked a little bit here about what is required and not to be humble and to really to boost yourself up. But I think for people who have A, literal experience writing reference letters at all, and then B, doing something about themselves, especially in an environment like graduate school where you don't necessarily feel what was the word that Rachel used? Ego resilient or something. Like grad school can be tough, and you don't necessarily feel like you're the greatest person in the world while you're trying to write a reference letter, trying to make sure you sound like the greatest person in the world. So I guess, do you have like a couple of quick tips on, for those of us that do have to write reference letters for ourselves, how to go about doing that?
So, yeah, so if I was your, so I'll just say, if I was your major advisor, I would be asking you to do just that. So I think it is true. You have to have careful balance with not overstating, but stating firmly what your accomplishments are. And most importantly is, why are you doing what you're doing? I think that seems to me to be the biggest thing is, you know, where do you want to go? And Rachel was right. It's really hard sometimes to say this, or Wayne may have said this too, is what do you want to be when you grow up? Okay. Over and over again, I hear, and when I'm reviewing things, that's the part I want to hear. Why are you doing this? Where do you see yourself going? And so if you are writing a reference letter for yourself, I think the first thing to do would be to jot down what you think your strengths and weaknesses are. Share it with your friends. I mean, you guys, this is the other thing. You guys are all in this together. Don't lose track of that. You can help each other, okay? You've all seen each other's foibles. I mean, you know, when I went to medical school, some of the best friends in my life came from medical school because we went through that drudgery together, okay? So, you know, you guys can help each other out. So giving each other a little bit of feedback is another thing. And I know that Kim, if you're in the neuroscience program, I know Kim is really keen on this. So the more you can pass these things around and the more you can sort of see some prototypes, the better it will be.
Yeah, I was going to add, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
No, I was just going to say the same thing. I was going to say, ask for examples. I'm sure your major advisor would be happy to share, or ask other people for examples of letters, because that's what really helped me, is to see some examples. You know, and there's so much that you can Google these days, and there's a lot of different universities that will share sample letters and things like that. So I would just do a little bit of research and see what those letters look like, and then you can tailor them to yourself.
That's exactly what I was going to say. But, you know, get examples of ones from well-funded applications, and you'll see the way that they were written, and that will help you put your first draft together. And, you know, it is a draft. So when you give it to your major advisor, they should at least edit and add some of their own thoughts to it, at least for some of it.
Great, thank you so much. So it is 1:59. We have 1 minute left. I can ask one more question, or I do want to be respectful of your time. So if you have to go, then we can end it here. Do you guys have to run?
I have a lab meeting at 2, but I could take a couple minutes.
Okay, well, that's dedication. If you do have to go, then I do want to thank you. I just wanted to quickly touch upon the people who are doing PhDs but aren't necessarily planning to stay in academia, and how can you phrase an application such that it shows that you're still a motivated scientist but not necessarily destined for an academic route?
I would say emphasize, so there generally tends to be two deviations. One is industry and one is teaching. If you want to be a teacher, I would talk to that part. If you want to go into industry or just know the job that you're applying to, know it well enough so that you can speak to the issues and why you would be a good fit.
All right, so basically, depending on what your goal is, craft your application accordingly.
Right, but I will tell you, there's so many times where I get these, again, you never want to send some pro forma generic thing of, I heard you're, you write to Genentech, I heard you're a great industry, I'm a neuroscience graduate student and I want a job. That's just never going to work.
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, in the interest of time and getting you to your lab meeting, I do want to thank all of you so much for coming. And thank you, all the attendees, for coming and your questions that you gave. If you would like to follow up with SOMA at all, you can always shoot us an email. And yeah, I just wanted to thank all the speakers. Thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.